when I was 9 years old, is when I first visited a rental go-karting track just to try it out for fun. The adrenaline rush and the thrill I got just from driving made me want to consider having a career in it.
How did you balance studies in the last 6-7 years?
When I was in sixth grade is when I switched to homeschool because that's when the racing schedule got more tough to adjust with studies.
What are some of the most prominent domestic race events?
For us, it was the Formula 4 Championship, the Indian Racing League, Formula E that took place in Hyderabad, and MotoGP that took place in the Buddh circuit. These are all events that had never happened in India.
Certain regions or cities which today have better facilities when it comes to karting?
Bangalore is kind of the main place for karting. Besides that, there's a karting track in Coimbatore and now one in Chennai as well. So I would say it's mostly based out of South.
What are the primary costs involved?
A season of karting in India would be maybe 15 to 20 lakh.
What kind of financial commitment should parents expect?
We've always been on the conservative side to help keep the cost to a low. In my whole racing career, I've only had about 2 racing helmets.
You would see a woman driver struggling. That is not because of some innate lack of skill. It is just lack of practice. That they land up on roads quite late in their lives.
So when you give your son the car to teach him how to drive, teach your daughter to drive as well, so that when you put her on the road, she won't be nervous.
Welcome to another episode of Raising an Athlete. Today, we shift gears into the accelerating world of motorsports with 16-year-old Shriya Lohia, a young motorcar racing sensation from India. From multiple podium wins in national and international karting championships, Shriya has become the youngest and the first female driver in the Indian Formula 4 Championship and has also been awarded the prestigious Pradhan Mantri Rashtriya Puraskar for her excellence in motorsports. Join us as we explore Shriya's journey, the state of motorsport in India, and what it takes to build a career in this high-speed, high-stake world. Shriya, welcome to Raising an Athlete.
Hello, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Lovely. So, motorsport racing, by no stretch of imagination, is a conventional, route in sports, and definitely we haven't seen too many female racers from India. So, it would be interesting to know from you about your journey. What prompted you in the first place to begin motor racing?
Obviously, motorsports isn't a very conventional sports career when we think about it, especially in India. A lot of people are not aware of motorsports. They don't know what it is because it's not as famous here as it is in Europe and other continents. So for me, when I was 9 years old is when I first visited a rental go-karting track just to try it out for fun. And then when I tried it out, it was something different. Like, I've tried a bunch of sports in my life, but this was the first one I felt that I wanted to pursue something in it. It was something I enjoyed so much. The adrenaline rush and the thrill I got just from driving that go-kart around the track was something that made me want to consider having a career in it because I felt so much joy in driving and in beating especially the guys because I was usually the only female at the time. That was something that motivated me to want to go into this line, and it's something that inspires me a lot.
Lovely. So you went actually for a recreational trip like anybody would do, and on such a trip you felt that this is something that you really enjoyed. One of the things I want to ask you is, like, one intuitive thought that comes when you think motor racing is risk and safety concerns, and I would assume that most parents of young kids would worry about the safety aspects of motor racing. So what was your parents' reaction, and how do you address those concerns?
Actually, for me, it was fine. My parents, obviously, like any other parent, they would be concerned because motorsports is a dangerous sport. Anything can happen to you at any point, and you can't always control what may happen. But my parents have always been adventure seekers themselves. They've always done thrilling activities their whole life. So for them, it wasn't too dangerous for them. I mean, of course, every single race, my parents are standing. They're always nervous. They're worried. That's very normal for every single parent out there for their child in motorsports. But they weren't too concerned. They were fine with. They saw that I was passionate about the sport and they want me to pursue it. And the risks is just something that comes with it.
Right. So do share a little about your parents or your family. You mentioned that they're adventurous themselves.
Yeah.
What are their interests, and have they pursued, or someone has pursued motor racing before in your family?
Not motorsports for sure, but my parents have tried out a lot of things. They love doing paragliding, they go for biking all the time, and they've been in certain off-roading events that are just like for fun, and also like they've just tried a bunch of sports that require you to be brave, I guess. They've always been those kind of people, but they've never pursued a career in it. They've always done this as like in their free time, as something they enjoy doing, but never in motorsports. Actually, it was a very, very odd way for me to enter motorsports, because there's a lot of children who join motorsports from their parents. Like most children have their fathers or their mothers in motorsports, and then they're encouraged to join that career and they find a passion for it from a young age, being surrounded by that. But for me, it was never like that. It was just something we discovered one day and something I fell in love with.
But I think what you said made sense to me. The core question being that your parents would have been apprehensive, but I suppose that if you have, I think even adventure or risk taking is something that if you enjoy innately, then it makes sense that you have a kid who you're encouraging in that. Can you share a little bit about your academic background, and how did you balance your studies in the last 6-7 years alongside your aspirations to be a motor race driver?
Currently, I'm in 11th grade, so I'm pursuing my studies right now. I'm homeschooled, so I spend most of my time when I'm not at the racetrack studying, just to cover up my portion, just to make sure it doesn't get too difficult towards the end when my exams show up. But it's not too difficult, I would say, because I've been a studious child my whole life as well, so it hasn't been that difficult for me. From when I was in 6th grade is when I switched to homeschool, because that's when the racing schedule got more tough to adjust with studies as well, because it would be difficult to get holidays all the time from school and to always get permission for holidays. I think it was an easier way to do homeschooling, which I felt goes well with my schedule as well. I'm able to concentrate on racing as well as studies with the way I want to distribute my time with each.
Right. So I want to ask you about your homeschooling experience. Do you miss out on the fact that you don't, go regularly to school? What about friendships? How do you keep up, with friends, etc.? How has that panned out for you?
For me, I think at some point I feel like I'm missing out on what a regular teenage life would be. For people hanging out with their friends, going out and meeting people in school all the time. But for me, it doesn't affect me as much, because I like keeping my personal life and my social life on a low. I don't like meeting people that often. I'm a bit conservative with the way I want to live my life. But I enjoyed spending a lot of time with my family and my close friends, but I'm not always that free to be there with them all the time. Like, it's quite rare that I hang out with my friends as well. So I think it gives me more time to work on myself, to work towards my career, which at the end of the day, I'm just happy I'm getting to pursue this career, because it's something so difficult, such a difficult field. And just the fact that my parents support me and they want me to pursue a career, they're supporting me all the way, is something that means so much to me. So I feel like missing out on a social life doesn't mean that much to me, as long as I'm pursuing my career and I'm able to make my way up and make my family proud is the thing that matters to me the most.
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's also a learning for everyone out there that while sport in general, and specifically something like motorsport, looks very glamorous and there's a lot of hard work that goes behind it, and there's a lot of sacrifice that goes behind it. So thanks for sharing that. I wanted to shift a little to understand a little bit about the interest in the domestic circuit. So motorsport in India has traditionally been focused on, the international events, like most fans would know about Formula 1. Do you see a growing interest in fans about domestic competitions? Like, are they starting to follow the competitions in F4 or, the league that's happening?
I think for sure, because India has a lot of motorsport enthusiasts. We know that there's a huge fan base just for Formula 1 from India, and people have always been passionate about motorsport. Like, there's a lot of fans on the internet who are Indian who love following Formula 1. And when Formula 1 did run in India, I think that created a lot of interest in motorsport for people who didn't even know what Formula 1 was or motorsport to begin with. So I think now it's a good thing, because motorsport is evolving so much in India itself. We have the Formula 4 championship that we didn't have before. And for people to support the athletes in Formula 4, is also something that's taking place. It's not as much as it would be in other countries, of course, because India is still developing in motorsports. But we do have people supporting their Formula 4 athletes, thinking these guys are going to be the ones who take us to the highest level of motorsport in the future. And that support is quite important, I think, at this level as well, because that's how we know we're developing and we're reaching the level of motorsport in other countries, and that's what we need for motorsports to grow in India.
So, can you share how the Indian racing circuit has evolved over the past, few years? What are some of the most prominent domestic race events that happen now?
Over the past few years, motorsports has had quite a few big changes that weren't there before in India. For us, it was the Formula 4 Championship, the Indian Racing League, Formula E that took place in Hyderabad, and MotoGP that took place in the Buddh circuit. These are all events that had never happened in India before, and it was something that is so important to grow motorsports here. And it's the main thing that we need to grow motorsports. Like the Indian Racing League is the equivalent of the Indian Premier League, which is a big deal because that's how you grow. We know there's so many people who follow the IPL every single year, and to see that interest growing for the IRL is also so important, because that's where we get our drivers and we're able to take them to the higher levels. And there's been a lot of growth, I would say. It's been amazing so far, and I hope it continues that way.
So, for listeners who may not be familiar, the Indian Racing League launched in 2022. In fact, Shriya, it would be great if you can share a little about the teams, the formats. I mean, everyone loves IPL. It would be interesting to know what are their counterparts in terms of teams and formats on the IRL.
The IRL, Indian Racing League, started in 2022 by RPPL, which has been they've been a huge promoter of motorsport for the past 2 years and longer. So the IRL is a similar system to the IPL, where there's different teams and there's drivers for that particular team. So we have about 10 teams with 4 drivers each. And basically the IRL has always been a very diverse sort of part. We always have a female driver in every single team, which is a great thing to have. We have 3 male drivers and a female driver, and it's quite a unique system because you have drivers from all different places. You have an Indian driver, you have an international driver, you have an Indian international driver, and a female driver, whether that's Indian or international. And that's always been very great. IRL was really important, was the thing that started the whole street circuit system in India that we so desperately needed, that we really wanted to see that kind of growth in India, to see government support a street circuit, because it's difficult enough to have a permanent race circuit, but to have a street circuit, that's how IRL has made that growth. And the second year we were able to also have the Indian F4 Championship, which is the Formula 4 Championship that came to India for the first time. And I've been a part of that family for the past 3 years, and I've been really grateful to experience all that growth and meet such amazing drivers.
Lovely. Which team are you a part of?
I am part of the team Hyderabad Blackbirds, which is owned by Naga Chaitanya.
Okay, lovely, fantastic. So, as someone who has competed in this inaugural F4 race championship, what was your experience with the league, and how has it contributed to your growth as a racer?
It was honestly incredible, because if you think about motorsports, it's such an expensive sport, and to make your way up from karting to Formula 4, the only other option before this was to go international. And to go international, that's so much money to just travel and stay and testing and all of that. But to have that championship in India was something that was so important and something that helped me so much. I was able to move up from karting to Formula 4 right here in India, in my home country, which is something I didn't think would have been possible, honestly. All of us think we're going to make those big steps once we go abroad. But to be able to make that step up in India was such a big deal. And then this year, with celebrities buying all the teams in F4, with Arjun Kapoor and Saurav Ganguly and John Abraham, Naga Chaitanya, these big names buying the teams was something that was so big, something so important to promote motorsports, which has been incredible, honestly. It's an opportunity I'm incredibly grateful for.
Fantastic. I also want to ask you, what can fans do to support the growth of motorsport in India? In fact, it will be great if you can share names of some of the prominent motorcar racers, both male and female, and maybe the audience out there can follow some of them.
Yeah, no, for sure. One of the biggest One of the Indian drivers who's representing India at the high stage of motorsports is Kush Maini, who has been my idol for many years, and I've met him a bunch of times. He's a great guy. He's an amazing driver. He's racing in the Formula 2 Championship at the moment, and he's doing really well. I think he's one we should really support because he's our closest prospect for F1, and I hope to see him there in the next few years. We have Kush Maini, we have a bunch of other drivers. There's so many great drivers out there who are taking India to the top step. I think once you really dive into motorsports and you see there's so many different disciplines in motorsport itself, there's so many athletes from India who are making their mark. I think it's so important to support these athletes because the higher they get, the better motorsport grows, and it's just only going to get better for us from there.
Yeah. I think it's a belief about role models that role models play a huge role. There was a Abhinav Bindra, and that created a belief that we can win an Olympic, and what it did for shooting. And similarly, I think what you're doing, being a girl racer, as a role model for young girls out there, I think it's an incredible milestone that you've achieved in what is conventionally considered like a very male-dominated sport. Can you also share some inspiring stories of women and motorsports, either internationally or from your own journey? It would be interesting for the audience to know a little more about some of those stories out there.
There's so many inspiring women in motorsports. There aren't many in India, which obviously there's growth that's taking place. But internationally, there've been some great women. Two of my favorite drivers are actually Sophia Flörsch and Jamie Chadwick. Jamie Chadwick, in fact, raced in India back in 2018-19 in the MRF Challenge, and she ended up winning that championship at a circuit I've raced at recently. And to see that is such an amazing feeling because she was there, she was competing with all the guys, and she was beating them. And she set such a standard for women that women can be here as well, women can beat the guys as well. She worked hard for that championship. She always gave it her best. She always gives it her best in whatever she does. She races in Indy, she's raced in multiple series, and she's always given her best and competed with the guys and shown that she's there because she's just as good as a driver as all her male counterparts. That's something that's so inspiring. And also Sophia Flörsch, she raced in FIA F3 recently. She's also a very inspiring driver. She's been the first female to score points in FIA F3 recently, and she races in multiple series as well, which is something that's really inspiring because to see women at the highest level of motorsport inspires us and gives us that belief that we can be there as well. And that's so important because there's not a lot of women representation in motorsport, and these women, they're setting the standards, they're breaking those barriers, they're making the way for drivers, younger female drivers like us to get that.
I want to ask Shriya that my understanding is that there is motorsport is also one of the sports where gender really doesn't make a difference. Yet no female driver has even competed in Formula 1 since 1992. So do you believe there is a potential for female F1 winners in the near future? And what do you think needs to happen to make this a reality?
I think it's definitely possible. We've had women compete in Formula 1 before, and we have so many more women just in Formula 4 level at this point. So there's a lot of scope and there's a lot of talented female athletes. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. As you said, motorsports is a sport where men and women can compete equally. There's not a lot of difference there. But I feel like there's some changes that need to be made in terms of the way the higher Formula cars, Formula 3 and 2 are built, because I feel like those cars were mainly built around the feedback of male drivers at that point. And nowadays, recently, they started development of these cars with taking feedback from female drivers as well. Because I've seen certain female drivers say that the cars for them are not as comfortable as they would be for a male counterpart, because obviously male and female's bodies are different. So the way that they adjusted to the car was different to their male counterparts. But nowadays they've started taking those things into consideration. The F3 and F2 organizations, they've taken that feedback. They've given female drivers the opportunity to test those cars and try to understand where the issue is, where it lies, where they face that difficulty, to make that easier. I think that's one thing. And then even in terms of sponsorship, like I said, motorsports is so expensive. there's different factors. If you look at a lot of female drivers' careers, they've always had separate reasons. Maybe someone didn't have enough sponsorship money, maybe someone faced that issue with the car and stuff like that. So I think it's more about finding female drivers at a young age, taking that feedback in, working on developing those cars to make sure it's as comfortable for a female driver as it is for a male driver, and support in terms of financial support. I think those are some factors that really go into it, and supporting females throughout racing against males, because I think that's something that's so important, because as in general, as athletes, males are known to have more aggression, more sort of like a more risk-taking thing as opposed to women. But I think as long as you race with the men, you get used to that and you learn from them, and you learn to become better than them by racing against them. If you're racing in an all-female series, it gets a bit difficult at that point. But I think it's pretty good. There's a lot of female interest growing now. As long as I think those factors are worked out, shouldn't be difficult.
I think you've shared some very important points out there. It reminded me of a book I had read about, the world being designed from the perspective of men. So often, those experiences for women are harder, whether it is, maybe even public washrooms outside. They're not really designed for the needs of the women, or actually it's said for a conventional car, how it is designed, what to say of like a motor car. It'll also be interesting if you can share for our listeners who may not be familiar with the different racing formats, a bit about the different formats from karting to F1. Can you share a little about these different formats?
Motorsports is such a vast sport. There's so many disciplines in it. It's not just Formula One. There's so many things to go over. For most children who start out at a young age, obviously karting is mainly the only option, which you can start from around the age of 6 to 7 years old. So that's karting, and you do that for a few years, progressing through the age categories in that, depending on how old you are. And then after that is Formula 4, and then Formula 3, 2 and 1. So that's like the single-seater ladder, which is Formula 4 is 15 onwards, and then Formula 3 is a bit onwards that. Like it just gets quicker from there. Formula 4 is slightly slower than Formula 3, Formula 3 slightly slower than Formula 2, just to make it easier progression. But besides the single-seater ladder, there's so many disciplines in motorsports. There's rallying, in which you have road cars, normal road cars that we drive, which are modified to be rally cars, to work in different terrains, and there's different stages. Like there's so many different disciplines. Everything is so different in each discipline. Then there's circuit racing, there's endurance racing, there's autocross, motocross, dirt cross, MotoGP. There's so many things. It all depends. It's all different terrains. Some are on circuit, some are not on the circuit, just in public roads that you shut down for a certain amount of time. Everything, there's so many different disciplines in motorsports. I think it would be a very long conversation if we went into each one of them. But that's another way of saying that anyone who's interested in motorsport, I'm sure there is something out there for you. If it's not single seaters, it could be rally. If it's not rally, it could be endurance. There is something out there for everyone, depending on what your particular interest is.
So it'll be interesting to know that once you're young and you're doing karting, how do you choose from there amidst these different formats? Like how do you choose which of these might be something that may be appropriate? One is interest, but are there any other factors?
I think there is. It depends on your budget as well, financially, where you can go ahead with it. Like, for example, single seaters is the more expensive way. I would say it's the most expensive one to follow. It takes a lot of money because it's obviously it's a very premier racing series that's at the circuits, and there's so many people, there's so many things involved, so much that goes into it, logistics, the cars, everything. But if you go into like rally or autocross, that's kind of simple because, like I said, it's a road car and you have to spend lesser amount on upgrading that car. Just in terms of that, it depends on the facilities and everything. So when you're considering what you want to do, there's a lot of factors with it, like financially, or the way your driving style is. Once you figure that out, once you try a few disciplines every now and then, you figure out which one sits best for you, like what you enjoy the most. That's, like I said, interest. But yeah, financially too, there is a difference. Like single seaters is going to be more expensive than most other formats, so that's something to consider as well.
So you said kids could start at 6 to 7 years. What are the good karting clubs or academies where kids can learn the basics? And do you feel there are certain regions or cities which today are better equipped or have better facilities when it comes to karting?
For karting, for sure. I think karting in general, or motorsports in general, if you take single-seater racing, is so much more based out of the south part of India, which is more in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, all those states. They have the racing circuits there. Obviously, we had Budh circuit, which was in Noida, but it's not functional for any series as of right now, except for MotoGP. But yeah, it's mostly in the south. So if you were to start karting at a young age, those are the only places you can go. And there's quite a lot of teams, like the number of teams have grown a lot since I started karting. So there's a lot of options to choose from. Mostly though, they're based out of Bangalore, or Bangalore is kind of the main place for karting, I would say, in India. Besides that, there's a karting track in Coimbatore and now one in Chennai as well. So I would say it's mostly based out of south, where you want to start your career.
And how much time do kids typically need to dedicate to karting practice when they're starting off, but they're thinking of pursuing it seriously at a competitive level?
I feel like it depends from child to child, like how quickly they grasp and how much time you would think is necessary, because there isn't actually a fixed amount of time that you would say that this is how much you need to train. But obviously you would want to get in quite a lot of training before your first participation, because training and then racing, those are completely different things. You can't train to race. It's the experience that you need to like be at one with the kart. You need to know how to handle it in every situation, because anything can happen in a race. You can't exactly train exactly how the race is gonna, you can't know how it's gonna play out. So there isn't exactly a fixed time, but I feel like maybe about 10 to 15 days of proper testing of developing your skills would be a good amount in karting before your first participation.
That's pretty fast, I would say. With 10 to 15 days, if you're a good learner, you're saying that you could actually be competing. I think that's pretty thrilling for a young person. So you mentioned that motorcar racing is expensive. What are the primary costs involved in starting and sustaining a career in motorsports?
In motorsports, the first thing, like in karting itself is a bit on the expensive side. So I think about a season of karting in India would be maybe 15 to 20 lakh if you're looking at that, if you're looking at the national championship. Then abroad, obviously, the expenses get higher. But yeah, in India, I think it would be about that much for a season. And then testing would be a bit less. It also depends whether you're purchasing your own go-kart or you're renting one from the team. Those costs really vary from there. Because for me, in my karting, I never bought a personal go-kart because we always felt as a family it was too expensive to do that. So yeah, I think that would really depend on what you want to do, whether you want to spend a lot of time in karting as well, or if you want to just do 2 to 3 years in karting. Again, like if you're a quick learner, it would maybe take you less time. If you feel like you need more experience, if you need longer in go-karts to understand the basics of racing, that's like the cost will be different, of course.
Is there financial support or sponsorships that are available? Because at this kind of cost, this sounds pretty prohibitive for someone who's not coming from a upper or a very rich background. Is there more participation from, let's say, the upper middle or middle class background kids? And if yes, is there support available for them?
Just in motorsports, obviously, because it's so expensive, there's a lot of participation from children from rich families, because it's not exactly affordable for like the middle class or the lower middle class. So like I said, the starting cost itself is quite a lot for a family to put into their child for just go-karting. So definitely there's a lot of children from rich families, but I think as you progress over the years, if you have a good resume, if you've had good results, you can reach out to a few companies that would want to sponsor you, as they would take care of your costs, so you wouldn't have to spend as much as you normally would. So I think there are a few opportunities in India like that, but like I said, it's still developing, so it's not as much as it would be abroad for drivers who already are European and have European companies backing them. So yeah, I think maybe it's still growing, but yeah, you could definitely get some financial support.
Right. But what you said was that when you're starting off, you're really on your own. So in the start of your career, you actually need to financially back yourself. And it's only when you've accomplished, like in any other sport, when you've kind of established is when probably you're saying sponsorship or support kicks in. So overall, what kind of financial commitment should parents expect when their children starts karting, and how does this scale as they progress? So let's say you're a 9-year-old, you could share based on your journey as well. What does that look like?
So when you go into karting, it again, like I said, it depends on how many years you want to spend in karting. I've spent about, I think, 4 to 5 years, out of which financially my parents hadn't made a huge commitment. Like maybe the first and second year I haven't actually raced as much as my counterparts, because like I said, I'm not from a very affluent background, so we've kind of tried to get our way around with just doing a few participations every year rather than a full-fledged package. So with that, karting I did for a few years, and I think two years into karting, I was able to find sponsors to fund my karting, so my family won't have to make that financial commitment. Then into single seater, it was almost close to impossible. Like from the background I come from, it felt impossible just to test single seaters because the expenses are so high. Even in India itself, like it is comparatively cheaper, but it's still a lot for my family. So I was able to get sponsors for that, obviously, because it's too expensive. So my sponsors funded my single seaters as well. I think besides that, it was just like that. I didn't spend a lot of time in karting, and I also didn't spend a lot of money on like racing gear or like unnecessary purchases, I would say, because there's a lot of drivers who are from the rich backgrounds. They have that kind of financial ability to buy new racing gear every 1 to 2 years, or buy new helmets or get the helmets painted and stuff like that, which is kind of added expenses. Obviously we would spend when it's important with regards to safety, but if you don't see a reason to spend extra, we wouldn't do that. We've always been on the conservative side to help keep the cost to a low. Like for me, in my whole racing career, I've only had about 2 racing helmets, which is kind of funny because I've been in motorsports for 7 years. And my second racing helmet I got this year, because you obviously need a different helmet for single-seater racing and a different one for karting. But I went throughout my whole karting career with just one helmet, which I felt was completely fine with me, because I've seen drivers who kept buying a new one every 1 to 2 years, and I just didn't see the point. Like if it was safe, if it was fine and it worked for me, I was okay with it, because at the end of the day, it's kind of about surviving in motorsports, because with the expenses so high, there's no way for you to support it on your own unless you're from a very wealthy background. And I think conservative is the way to go with it. So I think it would be a financial commitment for sure, putting your child into the sport, but as long as you're able to get sponsors and your child is working hard and they're passionate about the sport, I think it's worth it.
I think you make some excellent points on for someone who may not be coming from an extremely rich background but can smartly work on their career to make sure that all the for all the functional stuff, the finances are in place, but for all the add-ons, and it's a point that I feel I have heard from experts across. I mean, we had Disha Millet in our previous episode, and she was making the same point in context of swimming, to say that kids at a very junior level are sometimes wearing, for inter-school meet, they're wearing racing suits which are very expensive, which is really not required. So I think I love what you shared from your own journey of how you made that possible. I also want to ask you that you got selected for the FIA Girls on Track, the Rising Star program. Can you share a little more about this program? What's the kind of support that's offered, and how has this helped you?
I was selected for the Girls on Track program in 2022. It was a program that took place in France, which is obviously another international experience for me, which was incredible, honestly. I went there were a lot of other female drivers from around the world, and I was able to learn a lot from that experience, because like I said, there's kind of a gap in motorsports in India and abroad. So the level of competitiveness, the circuits and the facilities, it was new to me. It was different. It was challenging, but I think it taught me a lot. It gave me that exposure that I needed with the drivers from abroad, to see how they function during a race weekend, how everything goes in their lives, in their championships. So I think it gave a really good insight, and learning from those drivers also was a really nice experience, to try to apply those back here in India, to understand their perspectives and how how they handle race weekends and how they drive, their driving styles and stuff. I think it was really good to learn from them. I think it was a great opportunity to get drivers from around the world and sort of have a great way of learning from each other.
Fantastic. So you spoke about how international exposure is so important. How well equipped is India in terms of the motor training facilities and coaching for young drivers?
India is still a bit behind as compared to other continents, because the interest in motorsports in those countries has been there for decades, for more than decades. Honestly, they've been very supportive because they've had a lot of Formula One drivers, a lot of racing drivers come out of those countries and make a name for themselves. But India hasn't had that. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the support that Indian drivers are lacking, that we don't have enough sponsors or companies that want to support motorsports, because we see a lot of them leaning more towards cricket, because cricket is the biggest sport in India, I would say. So I think that kind of support, it's important in motorsports as well. That's why we haven't had a lot of representation. That's why there hasn't been a lot of work on the grassroots levels, on the facilities of motorsports, and that's why there's less participation. And that's why I think parents as well are skeptical about putting their child into the sport, because it's kind of an unpredictable environment. You don't know what could happen next, whether you run out of funds or whether you're not able to afford that kind of commitment with studies as well. Like in India, how big of a deal studies are for us. It's difficult to be in a sport where you don't know what's happening next. You don't know whether your future is confirmed or it's not, or if you're going to get that support, if you're not going to get that support. So I feel like it's a lot easier for drivers in other continents. Like I said, in Europe, it's so common. Motorsports is very well known. In India, it's not well known itself. A lot of people don't know motor racing, and if they do, they know Formula 1. And then to explain to them Formula 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, that's a lot. But yeah, I think it just needs to grow in terms of support, the support that motorsport drivers get. I think that's something that's so important. And to get drivers, to get those facilities in India, to get those drivers from abroad to come and race in India with our drivers is something that will really take it to the next level.
Right. So do you feel that someone can build a strong foundation here without going abroad, or for someone who's looking at moving up the ladder internationally, international exposure early on is important?
I would say it hasn't been difficult to build a resume here. Like as I said, I haven't been international as much. There's been a lot of drivers I know that I've raced with who have been internationally for a season and longer. But I think it's possible. Like I said, with Formula 4 now, you're able to build a bit of a karting career and then move up to Formula 4 and then maybe take the step rather than just straight away after karting. Yeah, I think it would be fine, but like I said, it's not as developed as it is in other countries. There's not that level of competition that should be there. I remember I recently spoke to Kush Maini, like I said, my idol, and he said the same thing. He said that he was the best driver. Like he finished on top in India, but every time he would go abroad after that, he wouldn't be as competitive because it would be difficult for him to adjust to the way those people drive, the circuits and all of that. So I think that's something that he said that's so important, because we could work our hardest to just be the best in India, but to go abroad and see their different racing scene, to see their level of competition and their facilities and their tracks, circuits, that can get a bit overwhelming. That can get a bit difficult to deal with once you merge from the Indian motorsport background to theirs. So I think it's important to have participation with them as well. But like I said, it's kind of expensive too. So we would love if there's way for drivers to come to our country and race with us, so we can sort of get that development and then merge into those competitions and be competitive and be straight away at the top.
Right. So you're saying that you can get started in India, but for really a racer to thrive internationally, eventually in their journey, they need to be competing. I mean, we don't have probably those highly competitive conditions over here yet. So I think you already spoke about how difficult a career path is, but really, what does a career pathway for a aspiring racer look like?
Like I said, it depends on the discipline as well, but generally you would start from karting from a young age if you're starting at a young age. But motorsports does not have a lot of age restrictions, I would say. because it varies from discipline to discipline. If you go into rally, there's a lot of older drivers. There's about 18 years onwards, like after you get a driving license, is anytime you can enter rally. But with karting and single seaters, you really need to be on the younger side. Like you need to start it at a young age for yourself to be ready at that point, because it's difficult to just throw yourself into a single seater race without having a few years in karting and the basics of racing basically. So I think that's something that's quite important in single seater. But in other disciplines, it's kind of, you can join when you're a bit older, like I said, in rally, in autocross and circuit racing. You can join at any age in your life, honestly. But I would say the general path, like I said, it varies from what discipline you want to be in. But it's kind of just progressing up your way through junior series to senior series to the highest level is the general pathway. But again, you never know what life throws at you, honestly. You could have a huge financial setback and you might have to switch to a different discipline, or you may feel like it's a lot of money just to spend in one discipline consistently, and suppose you haven't had a good year in motorsports in that particular series, you'd have to make that big of a financial commitment the second year, and you can't really be very sure about it, because motorsports is, again, it's not just a sport where you're the only person there and if anything is to go wrong, that you're the person to blame. These are cars that you're racing with, and cars have technical issues, mechanical issues that you have no control over at that point, which could really affect your results and your performance to put up to your sponsors. And that is also a big thing to consider, because it's quite unpredictable. Like I said, you can't always control what's happening to you. So it really depends financially, and otherwise it really depends on what your situation is, honestly.
Lovely. As the nature of the sport, which is full of risk, so is the career path or anything related.
Yeah.
There are no guarantees to be offered. It's really, I think, it's something that it requires a lot of courage, physical, mental, emotional, is what I'm taking away from this conversation.
Yeah.
So there's also news of Formula 3 championship that is going to be introduced from 25 or 26? 26. So there are increasing opportunities for drivers in India. Where do you see motorsport in, let's say, the next 5 years?
Motorsports in the next 5 years, I would love to see a lot of growth. Like I said, Formula 4's there. Formula 3 coming would also be a big deal, because then you would have that step up in India itself. And it's a big championship, so of course drivers from abroad would love to be here. But before that happens, we need those big circuits like the ones that they have internationally. So in the next 5 years, let's see, I think it would be great if we had the Formula Regional Championship come to India. On top of that, maybe get Formula E back, because we had that last year in Hyderabad and it didn't come back this year, which is just something that had a lot of attention. I think Hyderabad street circuit is so important. Even Formula E is so important. It brought so much attention back to motorsports, where it was lost after Formula 1 stopped in India. So I think that brought back a lot of attention. Even MotoGP, those things, I think we would love to have a few racing series run. The international racing series run their rounds in India. Like I said, Formula E and MotoGP, those rounds would be incredible to have those in India, to have those athletes visit India and drive here, and for sponsors to wake up and see that there's events already taking place and that we can sponsor our Indian drivers as well to get them to that stage, to that level. I think that's something that I would love to see in the next 5 years, to get that ladder so that you can move up quicker in your own home country without spending that much to, go abroad. To get that in India, and for India to be respected as one of the great countries in motorsports.
So you surely have a clear wish list of what you'd like to happen. So we do hope the secret Santas of brands and sponsorships to sort of weigh in on this. So you're one of the youngest female racers in India, and you're making headlines with that. What advice would you give to young drivers looking to leverage these new platforms to build a successful career?
For young female drivers, I would say, just firstly, there's, as a female driver in general in motorsports, it's so male dominated, there's always going to be people who are going to say things about you as a driver, as a person. They'll say that you don't belong here, or that it's a male sport, and that basically they make you feel like you don't belong. That there's always going to be people like that. There will always be supportive people, and there's always going to be unsupportive people. I think the important thing is to focus on what you can do on your own, on working your hardest in your career. Because even in general in India, we have such a stereotype of women not driving on the road as much in any family, or even being in any male field, which has always been like that in India. So I think it's a challenge you put yourself into. Like even for me at this age to be in this field is quite difficult, because I've experienced things I didn't think I would experience at such a young age. But at the end of the day, it's all helped me grow and become a better person, whether that's hate or support or anything that comes from any outside source. I think it'll be fine if, as long as you work hard, as long as you're able to show that you're there to beat the guys, and you beat them, and you do your talking on the track and let everything else just fade away. The important thing is that you're competitive, that you're working hard. Everyone's situation is different. No one's always going to know your whole story. So it doesn't matter what other people think or what other people say, because they will never know what it is like being in your shoes. So I think it's just work your way through it. Enjoy motorsports, because it's such a great sport, honestly. Enjoy the time that you get, and set a good example for the younger generation, for younger females who are hesitant or who feel like they're the only ones facing. Like sometimes you can feel so alone, you can feel like you're the only one facing all this hate, because obviously you're only going to be sometimes one of like 10 men. You're going to be one out of those, and you're going to feel so alone. But to see that your idols are facing the same thing and working through it and growing stronger is something that's so important, because you really can't change the people around you unless they're willing to change, and that change will come. And soon there will be people who won't make comments about women being in motorsport, but it'll take time. And till then, just work your way through it, work your hardest, and enjoy what motorsports has to offer.
Yeah. And I feel like as more women, like the tag goes, if she can see it, she can be it. So if a young girl out there can see you, and that's really the purpose of this podcast, is that she can also believe that this is something that she can do. One prompt that came to me when you were speaking about how there's this perception of women are not great drivers. Is that a myth or is that true? Objectively.
That's for sure. That's a myth. I think people have made it so common, because there's always only been men driving on the roads. They've made it so common that I think sometimes it really gets into people's heads. Like even women themselves, I feel like sometimes it can really get to your head and you can start believing what they're saying is true. But it's not true, because we've seen women excel in so many fields better than men, and there's never been any scientific study that says that men are better drivers or they will always be that 1%, 10% better than women. It's never been like that. And I think it's really just a myth. I feel like people have just built it so much in Indian households as well. They've just built it so much that you shouldn't drive, or they discourage women from driving. So it really gets into your head, and whether that's family, whether that's your parents who tell you that, it really affects you that way. It's something that you start believing, and that's something that's so wrong. I think that's something that should really end. We're living in such an advanced time where it shouldn't exist anymore. It should be equal number of male and female drivers on the road, or even in motorsports.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I also feel that it is lack of exposure, that sometimes it is, you would see a woman driver struggling. That is not because of some innate lack of skill. It is just lack of practice, that they land up on roads quite late in their lives. By the time their male counterparts, their brothers would have been driving for 10, 15 years already.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like men are given this privilege so much earlier. Like even if you look at a normal family, parents are already encouraging their sons to drive from like the age of 14, 15, giving them the car to like just practice around their locality, just to get used to the car, and they don't let their daughters do that. Also because I've heard this ridiculous thing that people keep saying, that if something were to happen to their daughter, or if they were to have some sort of accident or something at a certain age, it would be difficult for them to get married. I think we really need to get rid of that. That's just beyond ridiculous. I just don't see the point in that. Maybe it's important that that mindset gets away and people treat their daughters like they treat their sons, equal opportunities. When you give your son the car to teach him how to drive, teach your daughter to drive as well, so that when you put her on the road, she won't be nervous. She won't be nervous, plus face that backlash from everyone telling her that she's a female and that she's going to mess up. You need to build that confidence in your children, and that's the only way to get over it. Honestly, you can't expect to put them into that situation immediately and then adapt to it like the way a male would, who's been learning for so many years. That's the only way. You treat them equally, and then you see they grow the same way.
Fantastic. I think I couldn't have put it in better words. Thank you so much, Shriya, for being on Raising an Athlete, for sharing all your wonderful insights. It's just amazing to see that you're 16 years old and you have so much maturity, so much experience behind you already, and wish you all the very best for your journey ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I love this conversation. I hope a lot of people get inspired and we see a lot more people join motorsports soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Shriya.
Thank you.